Welcome everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion. It's about sort of redesigning procurement and the supply chain to the future. My name is Duncan Brock. I'm a director at Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, or CIPS, and I'm delighted to have such a great panel with me to talk through what the implications are for procurement and supply chains based on everything that we've heard this morning from John and from Peter about the challenges that's going on in the economy. So I've got three great panelists with me today. We've got Andrew Forzani, who's the Chief Commercial Officer for the Ministry of Defence in the UK. So welcome to you, Andrew. I think a huge spend that you control and a massive team as well. So it's going to be very interesting to get your perspective from a defence sector perspective on what's going on as we go through. We've got Sopan Shah, who's joined us. He's the Global Chief Procurement Officer for InterContinental Hotels Group. He's joined us from the States, so he's got up very early this morning to come and join us for this session. So thanks for that. And again, I think if any of you were watching the session earlier with John, and he was talking about the sectors that are most impacted by the pandemic, hotels we know has had a massive hit from that, and it's going to be very interesting from that just to understand from Sopan his perspective of the changes that's gone through. And then we've got Angela Q, who's the Senior Vice President, Chief Procurement Officer at Lufthansa Group, another sector massively hit by what's gone on. We know that the whole changes have happened across the airline sector, and it's going to be great to hear from you, Angela, and joining us from Frankfurt. So we've got a very international group here, which is great to see. So what we want to do here is really just start to bring to life some of your experiences around the changes and the challenges that's happened around not just the pandemic, but the global economic environments that we're all operating in at the moment. And we know there's different aspects associated with that. And maybe I'm going to come to you first, Angela, if I may. I mean, if you think of the significant impact that Lufthansa Group has had over the last 6 months or so from the changes, what has been the impact on your supply chains? What's been the impact on how you manage those supply chains in a very maybe different way than you were in the past?
Well, thanks much for the question. First of all, very happy to be here with the colleagues on the line. I'm very happy to share some experiences from my side. So indeed, Lufthansa Group was hit very badly through the last couple of months. So like early March, our operations really dropped to 10 to 15%, which is our Euro, flying capacity. That means we are basically grounded, in a way. And that you can imagine that for supply chain, we have had really three biggest challenges. First of all, of course, for me and my team, we are worried, as many of you do, is about our own health situation, what that pandemic means for us, for our loved ones, our families. At the same time, we have to secure our place where we have a good, safe place to work. This is the first challenge we have had. The second one, of course, the Lufthansa, although almost stopped flying, we were operating quite a few, let's say, intensive flights on the Lufthansa cargo piece, where we're transporting all the masks, medical equipment around the globe, around the clock. Second, of course, Lufthansa Group has performed quite a few rescue flights to bring people all over the world back to their home countries. So for us, supply chain means also to really maintain a non-disruptive supply chain, means we have to have our suppliers in place at the time which is needed. But that flight plan was not stable, right? It's really everything very spontaneous, on demand. So that means a second challenge for us was really to make sure that even though we are stopped flying, but still those operations has to be really make sure that the suppliers are there when we need them. The third one, of course, was also very challenging, as you might follow from the media. We were not so sure when we get the support from the government. There was lengthy discussions from all the governments happening in Germany, in Switzerland, in Brussels, in Austria, which is really like, for supply chain means we don't know when the agreement will be there. How long does it take until those rescue package will arrive at our company? That means for us, really means that you operate in the darkness. You don't know how long does it take to us, to sustain the cash flow. Basically, our cash intake was stopped. So we have like 5% revenue at that time. And at the same time, we had to manage a massive cash out activities meaning look at our suppliers, which supplier do we want to secure and which supplier we have to go there to ask for support. Like asking for longer payment terms, asking for crisis contributions. And that's actually the three biggest challenges I have had. In order, to give you a context, what was the challenge we have been through. I think personally, there's a lot of learnings I'd like to share as of today. I think you are on mute, right?
Oh, sorry, that's me.
Hear you.
Of course, it's always someone's got to do it. Yeah, all I was going to say was I think there's always that challenge of almost a steady timetabled approach to airlines and structure to suddenly being, as you said, very much more spontaneous and much more reactive supply chain that comes from that. So we'll come back to a couple of those points, I think, as we go forward. I mean, maybe Sopan, to come to you on the same point. I mean, you also had massive drop in demand has gone through this. I mean, how have you managed and how's your supply chain reacted to that?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's fantastic to be with everybody. And I hope everybody's staying well and safe at these trying times. So for us, we were able to see the firsthand impacts of what was happening in Wuhan. So we have 3 hotels in the center of Wuhan, including an InterContinental Wuhan that was actually the main operating base and the place where the WHO was staying. So as we started to see the impact that was emanating from China right around the Chinese New Year earlier this year, we had a sense that this was going to be a global challenge because we are global companies and we are global travel and trade across the world. And this was going to have an impact nonetheless all around the world. So first and foremost was acknowledging that. Second, we're a franchise business. So we work with thousands of independent owners and franchisees who own and manage sometimes these hotels that we franchise to them as a brand. And one of the challenges that we faced in that context was as the impact of this COVID-19 pandemic started to spread around the world and hotel owners started to face restrictions in operating their hotels, maybe from a local jurisdiction, from a state or municipality, or even a national restriction, we had to go into a mode of shutting down our hotels, closing the hotels. And as you have to close down a hotel, in fact, you're starting to operate in a reverse supply chain. You're actually trying to stop orders and replenishment that's taking place, maybe for food and beverage, maybe for operating goods and services, maybe for the energy bill, right? Because you're going to not actually have a operating status of the hotel because it's closed for a prolonged period of time. So really focusing on the shutdown was a key element of what we had to face around the world, and especially in the late spring, early summer, that was the peak of it. Now, since then, we're fortunate that there has been resiliency in many markets around the world. As you mentioned earlier, Duncan, I'm in the United States, and in the US, we have a very resilient model and a resilient business because we operate a lot of mainstream brands such as Holiday Inn and Holiday Inn Express that has seen some strong signs of recovery. And likewise, also in China with domestic travel, right? So we call them the green shoots, and we've seen quite a few green shoots over the year as we emerge. Europe continues to be challenged, especially with lockdowns that continue to come back into the environment from governments, which are obviously doing the right thing to protect their citizens and their people, but making sure that we can continue to operate our hotels. So we worked very closely with our suppliers to, one, as Angela said, manage our cash flow, which was very important to make sure that our cash flow and our franchisee owner and operator cash flows was protected in this challenging time of demand dropping. And then two, partnering with our suppliers to ensure that we are getting all of the critical items that they need to safely execute and run a hotel are available. So may it be mandating face coverings for every hotel colleague in any hotel around the world, or having industry-leading cleaning programs and sanitization programs that use the latest technologies for our guest rooms and our public spaces so the guests can feel comfortable. a lot of those categories, if you will, from a procurement perspective, were new to us. So we had to go very quickly to essentially ramp up those supply chains, build those partnerships, work with medical experts on our cleaning protocols and so on and so forth, and then deploy them around the world in a franchise environment. So those are quite a few challenges all wrapped up together, but it talks a lot about the resiliency that we have noticed in the supply chain and through our partners and our suppliers of rallying to help support the industry and the business.
That's good. Thanks for that, Sopan. And I think there's some parallels there with what you said, Angela, which was around, almost like new areas of spend that you're having to focus on that you haven't really considered before. And I think that, as you said there, Sopan, the new areas, new categories, almost new spend areas that you've got to focus on now, which weren't really considered in the past, but now are probably essential for safety of travelers, safety of the people who are working in the airlines or in the hotels. I mean, it's a very different focus, and I think I've heard that from a lot of people, that suddenly topics like PPE had never been spoken about in most cases, and suddenly now everyone's an expert in PPE and everything associated with it. I think that's the sort of dynamic that we've heard coming through from a lot of industries. And I suppose, Andrew, coming to you, you probably got the same. I mean, I think, but maybe your supply chains, were they disrupted as much? Did you have such a big impact that you've heard from the airline industry and the hotel industry?
Yeah, morning, Duncan, and morning, everyone. Really pleased to be with you all. I guess a slightly different perspective from what Angela and Sopan have said, because whilst many sectors, the immediate reaction was to lock down, and actually from a defence perspective, our message was the opposite. So we were very much saying, we need you to continue. We are not locking down. We are not stopping. We need to continue with defence outputs. So the message to our supply base and our critical supply chains was, you are a priority for the defence and security of the UK. We need you to continue. What support do you need to continue delivering? So we were our first few months was really focused on how can you responsibly get your suppliers and the supply chain to continue working within the kind of guidance that was given in country. So a lot of our stuff actually is still in the UK. So this was about supporting people to be identified as key workers so that they were able to, go to work, support. And a lot of that was around access to education and childcare to allow workers to actually go into premises. And that was obviously important from a UK perspective. And then some of the other things that, Sopan was just talking about, trying to make sure that our suppliers had access to PPE, which, to be honest, was a real challenge because, we had these situations where, quite rightly, the most critical access to PPE was to frontline healthcare workers. But we had quite critical demand across a number of our programs, where we've got some quite big capital intensive programs where people are working in very close quarters. If you think we've got people in shipyards, people working on submarines, people are working on aerospace manufacturing lines, quite close working, they can only really work with the right level of PPE and kind of guidelines. But we don't want to take PPE away from frontline healthcare workers. So lots of issues around how we could secure PPE into those suppliers that wasn't taken away from the kind of NHS in the UK. So the short term was all about getting those supply chains to be resilient and to keep working. We had a big UK government initiative around cash flow and around continuing payments. So there was a kind of prepayments program across the UK public sector that gave the confidence that even if productivity was significantly down, we would keep money flowing through our supply chains for that first 3 months. And I think that gave a lot of confidence to get outputs to be continually delivered. I think now that we're past the first kind of 6 months, we are now much more worried about financial fragility going forward and what the lasting impacts might be on the defence sector, particularly those that are more exposed to the kind of commercial aviation sector. But I think probably the difference in, maybe the other two perspectives is for us, the focus was how do you keep everything going? How do you keep everything going in a responsible way and keep your supply chains resilient?
I think that's interesting, Andrew, because as you say that you were helping the suppliers, supporting the suppliers, whereas what we just heard from you, Angela, was almost like going to the suppliers and asking them for help. And two very different approaches for the right reasons. But you also said, Angela, you weren't really getting the visibility from the government about when you would get that support, whereas Andrew was talking about there that the support there and we'll just carry on pushing it through.
What of course for us is not only we go to the supplier and say, hey guys, you have to support us, right? I'm personally someone who's really believe that a good supplier relationship comes through from many years, the experiences, how we worked together in the past. And then when the crisis started, then of course we went to our suppliers and talked very open and transparent. I'm personally like to really be honest, transparent, to talk about what issues we are, what that means for Lufthansa Group and what that means for our suppliers. So we had actually truly the understanding that some of our suppliers who deliver mainly to aviation industries are heavily affected, like as bad as we are. Therefore, we have different, let's say, strategies and passes. How do we, run the negotiations and how do we communicate? So basically, our principle is like, the suppliers who is not only serving aviation industry, they're, not that immediately affected. Those are the suppliers we actually relied on, and those are the suppliers who were actually very much able to provide much longer payment terms, different partial payment plans, and also they have waived certain percentage of the invoices. They said we understood this is a difficult situation, and I think we got really great support from those suppliers and service providers. For mid and small suppliers, we had a different strategy. Middle and small suppliers or private-owned companies, we have a special pass for special improvement for payment. So we make sure that those small, mid-sized, private-owned companies have immediate access to the cash when it's needed. So we really followed all the commercial agreements. We paid on time. We paid even sometimes beforehand of the payments in cases needed. So we made sure that through the crisis time, corporate responsibility remains a key task priorities for Lufthansa Group. So I think even though we really have been able to hold cash from March to mid of July, we didn't really have any legal cases occurred due to that we were treating our suppliers very fairly, very openly, and especially that we have special approval process for those smaller companies. And I think as a result, of course, going forward, the crisis is not over for aviation industry. That's gonna take us another, 1-2 years until we can come back to a new normal. That means, of course, we are still working with our suppliers to looking at solutions. Just by negotiation, we won't be able to achieve much more, more than 4, 5%, 6% every year. But now is a time we really look at what is our minimum demand. So we have recently launched a zero-based spend approach, basically to really work with our service and companies, together with our internal, product management, design department, to really look at what is the minimum request we need to keep the plane in the air. That's the starting point. We call them a zero-based spend approach. Look at, all sort of categories like crew hotels, uniforms, lounges, customer services, call centers. We look at all possible categories and worked with our suppliers, look at what can we do to reduce overall costs, reducing the cost for suppliers and same time reducing our operational costs. So this is everything is done in a very mutual agreement approach, that we don't play the big guys on the market to say, hey, we are Lufthansa, therefore you have to do this and that for us. I think that's attitude which we have showed towards the public has paid back also in the time when they supported us. I'm very much sure that going forward, we will have also a lot of collaborations with our service providers for the long run.
That's great. Thank you, Angela. And what you're describing there, as you say, is almost like complete reshaping of both your demand, but also the suppliers that were then supported going forward. And that's a total change in your business model, which has been driven by this. But sounds like a lot to do, but quite exciting in terms of the challenges it's faced. And maybe Sopan, coming to you on that. I mean, I know you've also been looking at what you do differently and how you manage things differently going forward in terms of the future disruption or the structure you've got. So maybe what are you doing within IHG to actually sort of react to that?
Yeah, and in fact, last year we set about our mission from a procurement perspective on what do we want to focus on, and the first kind of strategic principle that we based it on is we want to be focused on driving growth and innovation for the company, not just cost management. That's expected as part of what we do. So as we started to focus on our mission to drive growth, it came down to actually then looking at our operating model. So one of the things that we started to do later part of last year that just accelerated due to the impacts of COVID-19 was to deploy essentially a federated model. And a federated model for us is having our procurement team, which was predominantly based in outside of London, in the US, and in Shanghai, to instead now being based in 14 countries by the end of this year. So that's a dramatic change in a year during a pandemic of essentially trying to drive an element of decentralization or federation simply because we want to be closer to our suppliers and our supply chain. We want to be closer to our franchisees and our hotels so that we can better service all of the aspects that we need to do. Maybe by driving growth, helping them sign new hotels, open new hotels, maybe driving profitability from an operating cost perspective, what we call gross operating profit, or even having a more resilient CSR focused, what we call responsible procurement supply chain by working with more local suppliers, more small owned businesses or minority owned businesses, LGBTQ businesses. Those are the elements that we've been able to think about by first focusing on the operating model is about being closer both to our suppliers and to our customer. And by doing that, it's allowed us to move dramatically faster. Now, the challenges that come with that is keeping everybody communicating, keeping everybody synced up, right? So as you try to operate in more and more a global environment, but look, technology is a great enabler. The fact that we're doing this panel right now with the 3 panelists being in 3 different countries is a good testament to this new way of working can enable this collaboration through proper data, through leveraging the latest technologies, everything from ML, AI to RPA activities, to really build a foundation that's a global operating system for our procurement organization, but allows us to be very local, and hence that federated model.
I think that's really interesting, is it? That I mean, if you look back at a lot of procurement organizations, their category strategies have been pretty static. You've used the same old supply, you've done the same old thing for many, many years. And actually what you and Angela are describing there is fundamentally going back to basics and looking at what supplier base you need, how local you need it to be, and how you take that forward. And I think it's quite exciting from a procurement perspective, but quite challenging from the skills. And I want to come back to the skills in a minute, because I know a couple of questions have come in around skills and capabilities. But maybe, Andrew, if I can just come to you, because you talked about, I suppose, looking forward now, your concern is, I think you used the phrase supplier fragility, and what the longer term implications are going to be down through the supply chain. So how are you approaching, I suppose, risk and risk mitigation differently as you look forward for the spend that you've got across the Ministry of Defence?
I think for us, it's a recognition that kind of supply chain resilience and supply chain security is a really key kind of priority, and something that we have to worry about ourselves. So I guess because we've broadly got a contracting model and a kind of procurement strategy where we have a prime contracting model. So we'll have some big infrastructure programs across the globe, but we'll broadly be going through a single prime, and some like BAE Systems, Lockheed Martin, Rolls-Royce, etc. Raytheon, and we will expect them to manage the supply chain for us, and we'll expect them to broadly understand that and manage the risks for us, and that we will hold them, to account to outputs. I think what we started to understand actually before the pandemic with the UK exiting the EU and the kind of challenges that might start to give us was that we needed to, it wasn't enough just to manage the prime and to manage the prime well, because, frankly, they were struggling to manage their own supply chains and some of the security and resilience issues. So we were already starting to think, actually, we need to be mapping those supply chains ourselves. We need to be understanding some of the risks and issues at, multiple tiers. And we need to be working with the primes to try and manage that risk, because ultimately, actually, the risk comes back to us. I think as soon as that pandemic hit and we went into lockdown, kind of supply chain resilience actually went right to one of our top 3 risks across the department. So I was very quickly at the Defence Board talking about, having to answer the question, what are the resilience issues in our supply chains, and are some of these supply chains going to stop working in the next few months? And actually that was quite difficult for us to answer, Duncan. So there was this realization quite quickly that I had to go and ask a prime contractor to give me that answer. Did I actually think they had a handle on it or not? So straight away, what we started to do, we started to work with the primes to really get transparency, transparency across supply chain mapping, trying to map down to multiple levels and tiers, and then trying to work in a way that we kind of share that, and we try and maybe share that across suppliers where we've got common kind of mid-tier suppliers, which does raise, commercial confidentiality issues. It does really test kind of collaboration across the sector as well. But I think we've had some really good conversations across the industry on a kind of multilateral basis to say, actually, as much as possible, if we can share our mapping and share our concerns, you might find that we share a whole number of mid-tier suppliers that we are worried about, that are vulnerable, that we're all reliant on. And until you get a defence-wide picture, you maybe wouldn't know that. I would say we've never worked in that way, Duncan, with industry. It's been very kind of bilateral stovepipes, program by program, supplier by supplier. So I would say we're in the foothills of that whole conversation. But we've already invested in supply chain kind of resilience program. We're setting up new teams. So we've got the traditional category management, sourcing, contract management, SRM is our kind of key, our key teams. We're now setting up supply chain resilience teams. So we are recognizing that this is a key part of the work that we need to do. I think for us, there's the challenge. Be interested how others have approached this. How much you do yourselves as the customer, and how much do you rely on some of your big prime suppliers to kind of do that assurance, and how you share that information?
Yeah, and that's probably a whole topic in itself for another panel discussion, I think, Andrew, in terms of the piece there. We've got quite a lot of questions coming in, and I'm very conscious time's just flown by in terms of the discussion we've had here. I maybe want to come to a couple of the things that I think link a number of those points together there. So you talked there about a focus on suppliers. We talked about developing local suppliers. We talked about the challenges of mapping your supply chains. I mean, there's a skill set needed here, isn't there, in terms of the procurement people we've got in our teams? What are the skills fit now for what they need to be doing going forward? Do we need to be looking at maybe different skill sets or investing in those people? Because the procurement environment, the profession, is changing, and the challenges are a lot higher. So what do you think about that from a skills and a capability perspective? Angela, maybe start with you.
Yes, I'm glad to. Actually, I think I'm echoing a lot of what Sopan just also mentioned. So group has launched quite a tremendous procurement transformation when I joined in early 2019. So basically ease, which I call them. So how do we secure our transformation journey to be a very successful journey? The first one is about to really engage our teams, engaging them to look at, bring new ideas on board, engaging them to look at how do we business partnering in a much more effective, and engaging them also in terms of target setting
We seem to have lost Angela. Is that she's frozen on us?
You know,
oh, it's the classic of Zoom, isn't it? At some point, someone's going to freeze at some point. Angela, you just froze on us. Are you back? Okay. Sopan, do you want to just kick off on yours, and we'll pick Angela up in a minute?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, you know, I like to call them life lessons as we think about the talent and the skills that's needed in procurement moving forward, right? In fact, today, but also what the future will hold. And for me, it's come down to basically three things. One, the ability for people to build and nurture strong relationships. May it be with suppliers, may it be with their stakeholders, may it be with their colleagues. That as a skill of nurturing relationships and that soft skill of being a charismatic leader, engaging leader is very important. The second one is just this intense curiosity, because oftentimes what we have found is procurement is actually in heavy demand right now. This is our time as an industry to shine. And so having that intense level of curiosity across what you do, showing that you want to learn new things, you want to grow, you want to get into new categories or new functions, maybe into supplier management, so on and so forth, is very important. And then three, and this is a piece of advice that took me a while in my career to figure out, but when I did, it obviously accelerated my career, is to moving the conversation from people talking about how they're developing themselves to instead how they are developing others. And that's a subtle but very important shift. The moment that our strong people start seeing that their role as leaders is to develop other people, may it be peers, may it be colleagues, may it be their direct reports, you start seeing a shift in leadership skills that come forward that actually enable the future generation of the skill sets and the ability to navigate challenges that we're facing today, and I'm sure many new challenges we will face in the future. So really those three principles is what I've kind of said tends to be the transformation of skills and experiences that I'm seeing in leading procurement professionals.
That's great, Sopan. And I think that's a great framework that you just described there for the sort of the future skill set for procurement. Angela, welcome back. I know you just froze on us, but we got a gist of what you were saying there in terms of the challenges. But I think it's an interesting link there between what you're describing, that actually everyone needs to focus on skills, everyone needs to focus on relationships. And I think you've all described the need to work collaboratively with suppliers, work with them down through the supply chains. And it's new skills we're all learning and we're developing. Right. So
yes. Can you hear me now?
We can, yes. Welcome back.
Okay, great. Sorry for that technique. We have heavy rains today in Frankfurt area. Maybe that's the raining effect.
That's okay.
So what I want to emphasize is that actually when we launched the transformation journey last year, there are a few E's I would like to share with. I think that's very important. The first is about really engage your people. Engage them, listen to their concerns, know what they needed. How do we upscaling them? So I think those are the things I would like about, engage them. Talk about what is our joint vision, our joint objectives. The second one is about enable. I think the digital tools and data these days became even much more important. Before the crisis, of course, we are, traditional cost cutting, we do supplier management, we do, look at deliveries and all those, classical procurement work. When the crisis starts, you immediately see how important to have all the data transparency and all the data available at hand. Meaning when the crisis starts, you need to know what are the open purchase orders you have placed in the last couple of weeks. Which are the purchasing order you can stop? Which one you can say, I declare force majeure clause, right? You need to know how the contract was set up. What can you do to minimize all the ongoing cash out liabilities? All these things needs really make decisions which based on data driven. I think the third one is of course the whole communication skills. I think I cannot emphasize how important to equip our procurement organization with the right wording, with coordinated with corporate legal, corporate finance, investor relationships, which words we are using, and that's I think a whole bunch of high level sensibility what we communicate towards our outside markets and don't cause unnecessary noises on the markets. But at the same time, like I said, we want to be open and transparent with our supplier base to go through this crisis time. And I think the fourth one, of course, always I instruct my team to say whatever actions we are taking, this has to be within the legal framework. So we should not, just simply step out of the commercial agreements and say, hey, we don't care or we don't pay. I think personally, this is something which is very, very important on top of the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, I was going to come to you, but I've just got a chase up that says we're out of time. I always knew a panel discussion like this was not going to fit into 30 minutes. And unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap this up. There's been lots of questions that's coming in. What I suggest to anyone who's asking some questions is please put them onto the chat. Please use the networking function within the conference itself to connect with others and maybe ask others of similar mindset as to what they can do. And maybe as speakers and panelists, if you want to join in some of that chat, I'd be delighted for you to follow through, or some direct messaging with the people as well, as you can go forward as well. I'd just like to thank the three of you. It's been a brilliant panel, really insightful. So I know we could have run on for another half an hour, and probably should have done as well. But I'd just like to thank all three of you for your contribution today. I know for everyone who's been watching it, please do have a break. Please do enter the exhibition hall, go and see some of the sponsors there and talk to them. And I know another session will be starting in about 15 minutes. So look forward to that. But thank you all three. Really appreciate your contribution today.
Thank you for hosting us.
Thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.